The night air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, a silent witness to the tragedy that was about to unfold. The small town where I had spent all 16 years of my life lay still, its modest houses bathed in the soft glow of flickering streetlights. It was the kind of town where nothing ever truly changed, until that night. I was a girl who believed in fairy tales, who dreamed of a life beyond the constraints of our struggling household. My mother worked long hours as a market vendor, barely making enough to put food on our table. My father had abandoned us years ago, leaving behind nothing but debts and unanswered questions. Yet, in the midst of hardship, I had found joy in the little things, reading under the single candlelight in our small room, braiding my younger sister's hair, and singing in the local church choir. But that night, all of that was stolen from me. I had always been told that danger lurked in dark alleyways, in the faces of strangers, in places where women were not supposed to be, but no one warned me that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we trust the most. He was a familiar face in the neighborhood, charming, respected, and someone I had never thought twice about. He was a man my mother trusted, a man who had once carried me on his shoulders when I was a child, laughing as he told me stories about the world beyond our little town. So when he called my name that evening, standing outside the small convenience store near our home, I had no reason to be afraid. "Blessing," he said, smiling warmly. "Can you help me with something? My sister left some groceries with the shopkeeper, and I can't carry them all." I hesitated for only a moment, glancing back at the road leading home. My mother would be waiting, and she didn't like me staying out late. But he was someone we all knew, someone who had never given me a reason to doubt his intentions. "Okay," I said softly, forcing a smile. I followed him around the corner, expecting to see a bag of groceries, expecting nothing more than a simple favor. But the moment we stepped into the dark alley behind the store, I felt something shift in the air. The next few minutes would shatter me forever. I didn't have time to react. 1 second I was standing beneath the dim light of the alley, and the next, a rough hand was clamped over my mouth. Fear exploded inside me. His voice, once warm and familiar, had turned into a whisper of steel. "Don't scream!" I struggled, my mind unable to process what was happening. My heart slammed against my ribs, my body rigid with terror. This was someone I trusted, someone my mother trusted. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The walls of the alley became my prison, the cold ground my only witness. My cries were swallowed by the night, my pleas met with silence. And when it was over, when he finally stepped away, I felt hollow, like something inside me had been ripped apart and discarded. He didn't say anything. He only stared at me for a long moment before walking away, his footsteps fading into the distance. I lay there, my body trembling, my dress torn, my innocence gone. And then the rain came. It poured down in heavy sheets, washing away everything except the pain that had rooted itself deep inside me. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to rewind time, to undo the last 10 minutes, to be the girl I was before I had stepped into that alley. But I couldn't. I was no longer that girl. I don't know how long I lay there before I finally forced myself to move. My legs felt weak, my hands shook uncontrollably, but I willed myself to stand. The road home had never felt so long. Each step felt like a mile, and with every house I passed, I feared someone would see me and know what had happened. When I finally reached our small one-room house, I hesitated at the door. My mother's voice drifted from inside, speaking softly to my younger sister. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. She turned to me, her brows knitting together. "Blessing, where have you been? It's late." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't bear to see the pain in her eyes, to hear the disappointment in her voice. So I lied. "I lost track of time," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She sighed, shaking her head. "You have to be more careful. The world is not safe for girls like you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. She had no idea. The world had already proven just how unsafe it was. The days that followed were a blur. I barely ate. I barely spoke. I spent my nights curled up beneath the thin blanket on our shared mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying the nightmare over and over again. I flinched whenever someone touched me, my skin crawling with the memory of his hands. I avoided the market, the church, the places where people gathered. I felt like everyone could see it on me, the shame, the dirt, the brokenness. And then the nausea started. At first I thought it was just the stress. I had barely eaten in days, so it made sense that I would feel weak. But when the sickness came every morning, when the smell of food made me gag, when my body felt different in ways I couldn't explain, I knew. I was carrying his child. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, knocking the breath from my lungs. I was 16, barely a child myself, and now I was going to have one of my own. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away, to find a way to erase what was growing inside me, but there was nowhere to run. The shame, the horror of it all, wrapped around me like chains, pulling me deeper into despair. How could I tell my mother? How could I tell anyone? Would they even believe me? Would they blame me? The weight of it was suffocating, and as I sat in the darkness of our tiny home that night, my hands resting on my still flat stomach, I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. The walls of our tiny home felt smaller, suffocating. Every morning I woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream, that I wasn't carrying the child of the man who had stolen everything from me. But my body told me the truth in ways I couldn't ignore. The nausea came in violent waves, forcing me to wake up before the sun, rushing outside to empty my stomach behind the small banana tree near our house. My mother, too busy preparing food for the market, barely noticed at first. My younger sister, Azine, was the only one who looked at me with curiosity. "Blessing, are you sick?" she asked one morning, her large brown eyes filled with worry. I forced a smile and shook my head. "Just tired." She nodded, accepting my answer without question. But I knew it wouldn't be long before someone else noticed, and then the real nightmare would begin. I didn't know how to hide something as big as pregnancy. I was only 16. My stomach was still flat, but I knew that would change. How long did I have before my mother saw it? A month? 2? I spent hours sitting by the small river behind our house, staring at my reflection in the water, touching my belly, wondering what kind of life was growing inside me. A child born out of pain. A child I hadn't asked for. The anger burned inside me like fire. I hated him. I hated what he had done to me. But more than anything, I hated the fact that his blood was now inside me. And no matter how much I cried, no matter how much I prayed for it to go away, there was nothing I could do. By the 3rd month, my mother began to notice the changes. "Blessing, you are eating less," she said one evening, watching me closely. "And you look pale. What is wrong?" I shook my head quickly. "I'm fine, Mama." But she wasn't convinced. She reached over, placing a firm hand on my forehead. "You don't have a fever, but you are acting strange. Have you been feeling sick?" I hesitated, my heartbeat quickening. "Just a little," I admitted. She sighed. "I will get you some herbs from the market tomorrow." I nodded, hoping that would be the end of the conversation. But it wasn't. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt my mother's gaze on me. She was sitting by the small lantern, watching me the way she used to when I was a child and had a fever. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I knew she was starting to suspect something, and I knew I was running out of time. In our small town, girls like me didn't get second chances. A girl who got pregnant before marriage was called a disgrace, the kind of girl no man would ever want. I had heard the stories. I had seen how the market women gossiped about a girl named Chidinma who had gotten pregnant and was chased from her home. She had nowhere to go and nobody to protect her. I couldn't let that be me. I needed to hide this. But how? Everywhere I turned, I felt trapped. The people I once laughed with at church now felt like enemies. Every time a neighbor greeted me, I wondered if they could see the truth written on my face. I had never felt so alone. One night, unable to bear the weight of my secret any longer, I considered the unthinkable. I thought about running away, leaving town, disappearing before anyone could find out. But where would I go? I had no money, no family outside of my mother and sister. The world outside our small town was dangerous, and I had nothing to survive on. Tears streamed down my face as I realized that I was trapped in a body that betrayed me, trapped in a world that would never understand, trapped in a future I never wanted. It happened one morning, just as I was helping my mother prepare yams for the market. She stood beside me, slicing vegetables, when she suddenly paused. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Blessing," she said slowly. "Stand up." My hands froze. "Why?" "Stand up." I obeyed, my legs trembling. She stared at me for a long moment, her sharp eyes scanning my body. Then she stepped forward and pressed a hand against my stomach. I stopped breathing. Her eyes widened and her face changed. "Blessing." Her voice was barely a whisper. My lips trembled. "Mama, A sharp slap landed across my face. The sound echoed in the small room. Ezene gasped. My mother's body shook as she took a step back, her hands clenched into fists. "Tell me this is not what I think it is," she said, her voice shaking. Tears filled my eyes. "Mama, I didn't—" "Who did this to you?" she screamed, grabbing my shoulders. "Who?" I sobbed, unable to speak. Her breathing was heavy, her entire body trembling. "My God," she whispered. She stepped back, pressing a hand to her chest. She sank onto the wooden stool, her eyes filling with tears. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. "Not to my daughter, not in my house." The disappointment in her voice crushed me. She didn't hug me. She didn't tell me everything would be okay. She only wept. And in that moment, I knew. My battle had only just begun. The silence that followed my mother's sobs was more painful than her slap. It filled the small kitchen like smoke, suffocating me. Ezene had disappeared into a corner, her tiny frame trembling as she watched our mother break apart in front of us. I wanted to speak, to explain, to beg, to scream. But what could I say? Would it change anything? My mother, the strongest woman I had ever known, sat on that stool with her hands on her head, rocking back and forth like a woman who had just received news of death. And in a way, she had. Something inside her had died. Her pride, her hope for my future, and maybe even her love for me. Then suddenly she stood up. The force with which she rose sent the stool crashing to the ground. I flinched, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "Tell me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Who is responsible for this?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't say his name. His name was poison, and speaking it would only kill me faster. She grabbed my arm and shook me hard. "Tell me!" My lips trembled. "Mama, I can't—" The second slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My head snapped to the side, and pain exploded in my cheek. "You will tell me right now!" she screamed. "Who did this to you? Who ruined my daughter?" The words "ruined my daughter" cut deep, like a knife twisting in my stomach. I wasn't Blessing anymore. I wasn't her precious child. I was ruined. I tasted blood in my mouth and felt the hot sting of tears streaming down my face. But I couldn't tell her, because what would she do? If I said his name, would she believe me? Would she fight for me? Or would she blame me? Would she say it was my fault? Would she throw me out? Fear swallowed me whole, and my lips remained sealed. My mother's breathing grew heavier, her body shaking with fury. Then, she did something that shattered what was left of my heart. She raised her hands to the sky and began to curse. "God of my ancestors!" she cried, her voice thick with grief. "What have I done to deserve this disgrace? What sin have I committed that you would allow my daughter to bring such shame into my home?" I dropped to my knees, sobbing. "Mama, please, shut up!" she spat, taking a step back from me as if I disgusted her. I reached for her, desperate for comfort, but she yanked her hands away. "You are dead to me," she whispered. The words hit me harder than the slap. I gasped, my chest tightening as if she had just driven a knife through my heart. Dead to her? How could she say that? I had been hurting for months, drowning in silence, suffering in pain. And now, when I needed her most, she was abandoning me? She turned to Ezine, who was crying quietly in the corner. "Take your sister inside," she ordered. "I don't want to see her face." Ezine hesitated, her eyes darting between us. "Now!" my mother roared. Ezine rushed forward, grabbing my hand, pulling me toward the small room we shared. But even as I let her lead me away, my eyes remained on my mother. She didn't look at me. She didn't follow me. She just stood there, her hands trembling, her mouth pressed into a thin line, and I knew I had lost her. Inside our tiny room, Ezine sat beside me on the bed, wrapping her small arms around me. She was only 10, but at that moment she felt stronger than I did. "Don't cry, Blessing," she whispered, wiping my tears with her fingers. I broke down even more, clinging to her like a drowning person. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I don't know what to do." Ezine pulled back, her big brown eyes filled with sadness. "Is it true? Are you really having a baby?" The word baby felt foreign. A baby. A life inside me. I could barely believe it myself. I nodded slowly. Ezine was quiet for a moment. Then she surprised me. She placed a hand on my stomach and whispered, "I'll help you." A fresh wave of tears spilled down my cheeks. She was just a child, and yet she was the only one standing by my side. Not my mother, not my father, wherever he was, just Ezine. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in fear. What would my mother do next? Would she throw me out? Would she tell the neighbors? Would she force me to confess the father's name? I hugged my belly, feeling the slight curve that would soon grow. I was a child carrying a child, and I had never felt so alone. The next morning, my mother didn't speak to me. She didn't look at me. She only woke up, grabbed her basket, and left for the market. The silence in the house was heavy, but I knew this wasn't over. She might not speak now, but she would act soon, and when she did, I would have to face the world's judgment, alone. The morning after my mother's wrath, the house was colder than ever. It wasn't the Harmattan season, but it felt like winter had crept into our small home. The walls seemed tighter, suffocating, pressing in on me like a cage with no escape. Mama had not spoken a single word to me since she discovered my pregnancy. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than her screams, sharper than her slaps. I sat in the corner of our tiny room, my knees pulled to my chest, listening to the quiet sounds of the morning, the pots clanking in the kitchen as she prepared food for the market, the rhythmic pounding of fufu in the distance, the chatter of neighbors outside, oblivious to the storm brewing inside my home. But then, the silence broke. Mama's voice rang out like a blade slicing through the air. "Blessing!" My heart jumped. I knew what was coming. Slowly I stood, wiping the dried tears from my face. I glanced at Ezine, who was still curled up on the bed, pretending to be asleep. But I knew she was awake. I knew she was listening. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the main room, where Mama stood with her arms folded, her face hard as stone. "Get dressed," she said coldly. "We are going to see the pastor." The weight of her words crushed me. The pastor, which meant the entire church would soon know. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to fall at her feet and beg her not to take me there, not to expose me like this. But I knew better than to argue. Mama's mind was set. And so, with trembling hands, I dressed in my best Sunday gown, the same one I had worn to church months ago, when my life was still normal, when people still looked at me with respect. By the time I stepped outside, Mama was already waiting. She didn't spare me a glance as she grabbed my wrist and pulled me along, her grip tight and unforgiving. Neighbors stared as we passed. I could feel their whispers crawling up my back, their eyes boring into me. but nothing compared to the shame waiting for me at the church. The moment we arrived at the church, I felt my legs weaken. The massive doors stood open, inviting me into my own humiliation. Mama didn't hesitate. She marched inside, dragging me with her. The pastor, an elderly man with graying hair, sat behind his desk, flipping through a Bible. His wife sat beside him, her face unreadable. Mama wasted no time. She shoved me forward and said, "My daughter has disgraced me. She is pregnant." Silence. The pastor's eyes lifted from his Bible, settling on me with quiet disappointment. "Is this true?" he asked. My lips trembled. I could barely find my voice. Mama answered for me. "Her belly will soon tell the truth if she refuses to speak." The pastor sighed, shaking his head. "Blessing, how did this happen?" A simple question, but one I could never answer. I lowered my gaze, my nails digging into my palms. How could I tell them? How could I say it out loud? Mama's patience snapped. "Speak!" she hissed, gripping my arm so tightly I thought she might break it. Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. The pastor's wife, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. "Child," she said gently, "who is responsible?" That question again. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. I wanted to scream his name, to tell them about the monster who had taken my innocence, but fear held me captive. Would they believe me? Or would they say it was my fault? Would they blame me for not screaming loud enough? For not fighting hard enough? I had seen it happen before. A girl in the village had once accused a man of taking advantage of her. They had called her a liar. They had called her a temptress, and she had disappeared not long after. I couldn't let that happen to me, so I did the only thing I could. I remained silent. The pastor sighed deeply, disappointment thick in his voice. "This is very serious," he said. "A child out of wedlock brings shame not only to the family but to the entire church." Shame. That was all they saw. Not my pain, not my suffering, just shame. Mama turned to the pastor, her voice cold. "What do we do with her?" I felt sick. Do with me? As if I were an object, something to be discarded. The pastor's wife glanced at me again. There was something in her eyes, something softer, more understanding. But she said nothing. The pastor closed his Bible, his expression firm. The church cannot support this kind of behavior. She must be punished. A cold chill ran down my spine. Punished? For the next 6 months, Blessing will kneel before the congregation every Sunday and ask for forgiveness, he continued. She will not participate in choir, she will not take Holy Communion, and she will not be allowed to sit among the other young women until she repents fully. The words crushed me. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the rest of what he said. Kneel. Every Sunday? Before the entire church? Tears spilled down my cheeks, but I didn't dare cry out loud. Mama only nodded, satisfied. "Thank you, Pastor," she said. And just like that, it was done. My punishment was set. The journey home was worse than the walk to the church. Mama didn't hold my hand this time. She walked ahead, leaving me to trail behind like a criminal being led to execution. The moment we reached the house, she turned to me and spoke the words that shattered what little was left of my soul. "You are no longer my daughter." I froze. "Mama, please." She lifted a hand, silencing me. "From this moment on, you are on your own," she said. "Don't ask me for food. Don't ask me for money. If you want to bring a child into this world, then you will learn to suffer like a woman." Then she turned and disappeared into the house, slamming the door shut. I stood outside, staring at the wooden door, my whole body numb. The truth was finally clear. I had no one, no family, no future, no hope. I was 16, pregnant, and abandoned. The days after my public disgrace at church were the darkest of my life. The house that had once been my home now felt like a prison, a place where I was neither welcome nor wanted. Mama's words echoed in my mind every time I stepped into the kitchen for food. "You are on your own." And she meant it. She stopped acknowledging my existence. If I greeted her, she ignored me. If I cried at night from hunger, she pretended not to hear. If I sat too close to her, she would stand up and leave, as if my presence polluted the air around her. Ezine, my younger sister, was the only one who still spoke to me, but in whispers, when Mama wasn't looking. Even she was afraid to show me kindness openly. I was truly alone. At first, I tried to survive on leftovers, picking at the scraps Mama threw away, sneaking bits of food when she wasn't looking. But as the days passed, my body grew weak. Hunger gnawed at my insides like a wild animal. One evening, after going 2 full days without a proper meal, I made the mistake of asking Mama for food. "Mama, please, just a little." My voice was barely above a whisper. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she picked up her plate, poured the remaining soup onto the floor, and walked away. I stared at the wasted food, my stomach twisting with pain. At that moment, I realized something terrifying. If I didn't find a way to feed myself, I would die. Desperation led me to the village market. I wandered through the crowded stalls, inhaling the smell of roasted plantain, fried akara, and fresh bread, foods I could no longer afford. My hands trembled as I clutched the few naira I had secretly saved before my life fell apart. It wasn't much, just enough to buy Gary and a handful of ground nuts. I kept my head down as I moved through the crowd, hoping no one would notice me, but I should have known better. A group of women gathered near a vegetable stall spotted me. "That's her," one of them whispered, "the girl who got pregnant without a husband." Such a disgrace. At her age, heat burned my cheeks, but I forced myself to keep walking. I had no choice. I had to eat. I bought my Gary and hurried away, my heart pounding, but I didn't make it far before someone grabbed my arm. Blessing. I turned and came face to face with Miriam. Miriam had once been my best friend. We had grown up together, sharing everything, our dreams, our secrets, our laughter. But when my pregnancy became known, she had disappeared like everyone else. Now she stood before me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Pity? Shame? Regret? "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. Of course I wasn't okay, but I didn't say that. Instead, I forced a weak smile and lied. "I'm fine." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a wrapped piece of bread. "Here," she said, pressing it into my hands. Tears stung my eyes. I wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to my pride, but hunger overpowered pride every time. I took the bread with shaking hands. "Thank you," I whispered. Miriam nodded, but before she could say more, one of the gossiping women called out to her. "Miriam, what are you doing with that girl?" Miriam stiffened. For a brief moment, I saw the battle in her eyes. Then, she turned away without another word, walking back toward the crowd as if she had never spoken to me at all. I stood there, gripping the bread, realizing something I had been too stubborn to admit before. I had no friends left. That night I lay on my mat staring at the ceiling. My stomach was no longer empty, but my heart was. How had my life become this? I was 16. I should have been in school, laughing with my friends, dreaming of my future. Instead, I was an outcast, a burden, a disgrace. I turned to my side, trying to force myself to sleep, when suddenly, bang! A loud knock at the door made me jolt upright. It was past midnight. No one visited at this hour. Mama's voice was sharp. "Who is that?" A deep voice rumbled from outside. "It's me, Ezekiel." I froze. Ezekiel, the man who had stolen my innocence. Mama unlocked the door, and he stepped inside. The moment I saw him, my body turned ice cold. He was smiling, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't destroyed me. Mama didn't even hesitate before ushering him inside, offering him a seat like he was an honored guest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs felt like stone. Ezekiel's eyes found mine, and my stomach churned. "I heard about the pregnancy," he said smoothly. "That's why I'm here." Mama folded her arms. "And what do you want?" His smile widened. "I want the baby." Silence. I thought I had misheard him. The world tilted, my breath coming in short gasps. Mama looked at me, then back at him. "What do you mean?" she asked. Ezekiel leaned forward, his voice calm and confident. "Let's be honest, Mama Blessing, this child will be a burden to you, a stain on your family name, but I can take care of it." He turned to me, his eyes dark. "Give me the baby, and I'll make sure it has a good life." The walls seemed to close in on me. Give him the baby? The very man who had shattered my world? I wanted to vomit. I wanted to slap that smug expression off his face. But before I could speak, Mama's voice cut through the air. "That's not a bad idea." My head snapped toward her in shock. "Mama, you can't." She silenced me with a look. "This is your punishment, Blessing," she said coldly. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." Tears blurred my vision as Ezekiel leaned back, satisfied. It was in that moment, that terrible, gut-wrenching moment, that I realized I was about to lose the only thing I had left. My baby. And I couldn't let that happen. The air in the small room felt suffocating. I sat frozen on the floor, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. My own mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me, had just agreed to give my baby away. To him, to Ezekiel, the man who had ruined my life. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no." Ezekiel smirked as if he had already won. Mama's face hardened. "Blessing, don't be stupid. You have no way of taking care of this child. If Ezekiel is willing to take responsibility, let him." "Take responsibility?" My voice cracked. "Mama, he... The words refused to come out. I wanted to scream, to remind her of what he had done to me, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't care. She was ashamed of me, ashamed of the child growing inside me. And to her, this was a way to erase the shame. Ezekiel sat back in his chair, looking completely at ease. "Think about it, Blessing. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Let me take the baby and you can move on." I felt like I was drowning. Move on? How could I move on when the life inside me was all I had left? Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't care. I turned to my mother, pleading, "Mama, please don't do this. This is my baby." Her jaw tightened. "And what will you do with a baby, eh? Beg on the streets? Live like a beggar? I won't have you disgrace this family any further." The words cut like a knife to my chest. I clutched my belly as if I could protect the child inside me from her cruelty. "I'd rather beg on the streets than let him take my child," I whispered. Ezekiel's smirk faltered for the first time. Mama let out a bitter laugh. "You foolish girl." She turned to him. "Come back after the birth. You can have the child then." My whole body shook. She wasn't even giving me a choice. She was selling my baby like it was nothing. Ezekiel stood up, adjusting his shirt. "That's settled then." His eyes met mine. "You'll see, Blessing. This is for the best." He reached out as if to touch me. I recoiled so fast I nearly fell. His laughter sent chills down my spine. "Rest well," he said before walking out into the night, leaving me shattered and afraid. I turned to my mother. "Why?" My voice trembled. "Why are you doing this to me?" She gave me a long, cold stare. "You stopped being my daughter the moment you opened your legs." And with that, she blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Sleep never came that night. I lay awake, listening to my mother's breathing, my mind racing. She would never let me keep my baby. Ezekiel would never stop hunting me. I had no money, no one to run to, no plan. But I had no choice. I had to leave. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how I would survive. But if I stayed, my baby would be stolen from me. And I would rather die than let that happen. The following evening, as the sun began to set, I made my move. Mama and my siblings had already eaten, leaving me nothing as usual. She was outside talking with the neighbors. I slipped quietly into her room, my hands shaking as I searched through her belongings. There, a small cloth bag tied tightly with rope. I knew what was inside. Mama didn't trust banks. She kept her money here, Small amounts from the farm, from selling vegetables at the market, from whatever my older brothers sent home. I hesitated. This was stealing, but she was selling my baby. With a deep breath, I untied the rope and took a few crumpled bills. Not too much, just enough for transport fare, enough to start over. Then, I packed a small bundle of clothes, wrapped my Gary in an old handkerchief, and stepped outside. Mama's voice was still drifting from the front yard. I slipped through the back and ran. My heart pounded as my feet hit the dirt road. I had nowhere to go. No family would take me in. No friend would risk their reputation for me. But there was one place I could try. The only place left. The church. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant smoke from cooking fires. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I ran, my bare feet slapping against the dirt road. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a map or a solid plan. But I knew one thing. I had to get away before it was too late. Behind me, the small, crumbling house I had called home all my life stood in eerie silence. Mama's voice still drifted faintly from the front yard, but she had no idea I was slipping away into the night. My stolen bag of clothes was slung over my shoulder. My stomach churned with fear, but I couldn't stop. I had no other choice. The only place I could think of was the church on the far side of the village. It wasn't just any church. It was where Sister Margaret worked. She was one of the only people who had ever been kind to me, even when everyone else whispered behind my back. Sister Margaret had once told me, "No matter what happens, child, the house of God will always welcome the broken." I prayed she meant it. When I finally reached the church, my chest was burning from running and my legs felt like lead. The old wooden building stood quiet in the moonlight, its doors shut for the night. I hesitated. What if they turned me away? What if they told me to go back home? But the thought of Ezekiel coming for my child made my decision for me. With a deep breath, I stepped onto the church steps and knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. A few moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Sister Margaret in her nightdress, her gray hair tied back, her eyes filled with concern. "Blessing?" she asked, blinking in surprise. "What are you doing here at this hour?" The moment I saw her face, a face that didn't look at me with shame or disgust, I broke down in tears. "Sister, please help me." She reached for me immediately, pulling me inside and shutting the door. Sitting in the small back room of the church, I told her everything. I told her about Ezekiel, about what he had done to me. I told her about Mama, about how she had already promised my baby to him. I told her that I had nowhere else to go. When I was done, I expected her to scold me, to tell me to go home, but she didn't. Instead, tears filled her own eyes. "Oh, my child," she whispered, reaching across the small table to hold